Hey guys, welcome back to this safety video series. We are now going to talk about the table saw. This is going to be your final machine as far as the way that you work through all of these machines. You went to the miter saw to square an end and then also get your length. So you're going to cross cut on the miter saw. You then went to the planer, which was to surface or smoothen out the faces of the board and also get the thickness you need. And then before you came to this final machine, you had to go to the joiner to get a nice square edge so that it rides the fence. Okay, so with this table saw, I'm going to go over the safety just like we have in the other machines. The first question on the test, or the first thing I need you to understand, is safety glasses. Just like all the other machines, you have to have safety glasses on when using this machine or even being in the shop. You also need to come see me if you are nervous about using this. This one is probably the most dangerous one that we're going to use, except this one has some technology on it that's going to save you from cutting your finger on the blade. I'm going to go over that here in a little bit later on. First thing you need to do when you get to this machine, make sure that the blade guard is working properly. This is the blade guard here, this plastic piece. This guards your hands and your arms from the blade. Make sure that it is covering the blade completely. And you're also going to make sure that the splitter is working properly. This black piece behind the blade is going to be the splitter. Alright, what happens is when you push your board through this blade, it creates a little kerf. Alright, this splitter is going to go inside of that kerf to keep it separated. If you don't have that on there, what happens is the board tends to squeeze against the blade, and that's whenever you get danger with kickback because it's pinching and it'll shoot the board back past you. Okay, so make sure that is working properly also. Be sure that the blade does not contact the throat plate, the fence, and the guard or your wood before you power the saw on. Okay, so this is your throat plate, this red piece that is sitting on the table here, okay, where your blade is sitting in there. We're going to make sure that that blade is not contacting that before you turn the saw blade on. You also want to make sure that the blade is not touching your splitter and also your fence. This is your fence here. I don't know if you can see it in the video. I'll be going over that here in a little bit, but just make sure that nothing is touching the blade when you turn it on, especially your board. Okay. Be sure to remove small chips and pieces of wood from the tabletop before using the saw. Okay, just like all the other machines, the miter saw, the joiner, even the planer, you want to make sure that all the little pieces of wood and chips of wood are removed before you turn it on. Always be sure that your work is held securely against a rip fence or miter gauge before making a cut. I'm going to go over what a miter gauge is after a bit, but the whole point of going to the joiner before coming to the table saw is to have that nice square flat edge. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and grab a board that is already jointed off my scrap pile. Okay, so if you can see, this edge has been nice and flattened off with a joiner. So you're always going to have this held against this fence. You're never ever going to come up here and cut freehand. It always has to be tight against the fence, and I want you to pay attention to that fence when you push a board through. Okay, because if you have any little gaps in there against the fence, you aren't going to get a square cut. Okay. 7, the edge of the material. I already went over that one. Number 8, do not use both the rip fence and the miter gauge at the same time. I'm going to go over miter gauge here in a little bit, but just remember you're never going to use the two together. Once I go over it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay guys, so this is the miter gauge. As you can see, it has a bar on there with a little dial here that you can loosen and adjust to the different angles you want. Okay, what this is for, just like the miter saw, you can use this miter gauge on the table saw to do the same process. Okay, you do have the ability to put this on here, take your board. You could measure from this edge, make a mark, and line it up to the blade, and you could push this through likewise. Okay, and it would cross cut that material. If you remember a little bit back, or it might even be a question after this, but you're never going to use the rip fence with this miter gauge. Okay, what happens is if you use both of them, a lot of times people can get in a predicament where you are going to hold this nice and flat to the miter saw or miter gauge and then also use the rip fence. If you do that, what happens when you push it, sometimes this rip fence can be sticky and it can cause your board to turn this way. And if that happens to you and you're pushing it through the blade, what's going to happen is it's going to catch and it's going to rip that board out of your hands. Okay, so you're never ever going to use both the rip fence and the miter gauge at the same time. Now, if you are going to have to use the miter gauge to cross cut several pieces, what you can do is you can use a clearance block, which would be just a little piece of scrap wood, and you would put it right on to the fence here with a clamp, okay? And you could keep it back. You're not going to have this piece of scrap go the whole length of this rip fence, but you can keep it right here, and you can go ahead and clamp it right onto there. And what that does is then now you can set this where your piece is as far as the length that you need. And now every piece you bring up here, pretend that this is on here, you can go ahead and butt this right up to it, okay? And then you can go ahead and push it through, and now it's exactly set to the length you want every time. So very, very easy to do. What that allows you to do, you're not actually using the rip fence and this at the same time, you're using it as a marker to keep your length the same, but once you push past it, you are no longer touching the rip fence, so you're not using them at the same time. That is called a clearance block. That is on the test, so definitely remember a clearance block for multiple pieces when you're cross-cutting with the miter gauge. Okay, on to number 10. Do not cut material that may contain nails or other metallic hardware. Okay, very important. All these machines, you do not want to use metallic hardware or any metals in the wood, especially this machine. Okay, this machine has technology that can sense your finger. If your finger was to touch this blade, it would sense it and it would drop into the table. Now, the way that works is conductivity. If anybody knows what conductivity is, if that electrical current senses your finger, which we are conductive, it will drop into the table. Metal is also conductive. So if you put a board in here that has a nail in it, and that blade touches that nail, it's going to trigger how this technology works is there's a brake that as soon as it notices something conductive, it'll push a brake into the blade, which jams the blade and it drops into the table. So it would save your finger, but if you do it with a piece of wood that has metal in it and it sets it off, it's $150, $160 to replace that. So please, please, please watch the metal in the boards. I'm going to go over that technology here in a little bit more in depth so you can see it. There's also a video on YouTube if you want to check it out. You can just type in saw stop video, and the guy who actually created that technology has a video on there of showing you how it works. Do not cut bowed, twisted, or warped material without my assistance. We went over that a little bit on the miter saw, same thing. You will get a risk of kickback. Do not use a dull or dirty blade, okay? That's kind of up to me. I will be changing these blades in and out, making sure they're nice and sharp and clean. But a dull or dirty blade will try to lift that work up off the table and shoot it back. So make sure that you do keep an eye on that. I'm going to do my best to change those out, so you don't have to worry about it. But on the test, that is a question. 14, keep hands and fingers at least 4 inches away from the blade at all times, just like the miter saw. Remember the 4 inches. If this is not possible, you're going to get me to assist you. It is unsafe to cut round stock on the table saw. Anything that's a cylinder shape, you're not going to cut on this saw. Okay? And you are going to use a push stick when ripping material less than 8 inches. That's a test question. Remember, 8 inches. You have to use a push stick. This is a push stick right here. Okay? You will, anything that's less than 8 inches, okay, right now we're at 7.5, I'll lock this fence down because that's how you lock it. Keep this nice and tight to the fence, and you use your push stick. I always put the push stick right up against the fence and use your other hand to kind of help hold it against the fence. Now, watching your finger does not enter that blade guard. Right now it's in the up position, but normally this would be in the down while you were using it, and you will help push your material through. The push stick keeps your hands far away from the blade, okay, so please use it under 8 inches. What else? The saw blade should be raised no more than 1/8 inch above the stock, okay? Now, you could get a tape measure or a roller, put it up here while the saw is off, and check where your stock is, and you could take your board and put it right up against the blade and make sure that's an 1/8 inch. What I do is you look at the blade itself. There's little knives or little carbide tips in there. let me zoom in here for you, okay? You're going to make sure that that blade, if you look at in between each tooth, there is a little gully, I'm gonna call it. I want you to raise this blade up right to where the apex of that blade is, right to the bottom of that gully, so that you are, it does come out to be about 1/4 inch, a little bit over 1/4 inch above your workpiece, but I want you to get in the habit of that. It's gonna be an easier setup for you. It's not too much higher than the 1/8 inch requirement on my test, but just know on the test that the question's answer is an 1/8 inch, okay? Let's back out here and we'll continue. All right, so that is how you set your workpiece up. Another question that we're going to go over. It is unsafe. We already did the round stock. Use a push stick. We already did that. Do not stand directly behind the blade while starting and using the table saw. Get in the habit of standing to the left of the blade, okay? If there was a kickback, it would shoot past you, all right? I'm going to go over how you cut on here in just a little bit, and I'll explain that a little bit more in depth. What else? Wait until the saw is at full speed before starting a cut, okay, just like all these machines. This one will pretty much start up right away, so you don't have to wait too long, but just make sure it's at the max speed. Stop cutting operation immediately and get me if you notice anything abnormal. 20, do not crowd or bind the saw blade. The work may be thrown from your hands or the machine, and your hands might slip into the blade. So you're going to let this blade do the work, okay, but you don't want to go too slow where that's burning your wood, but you also don't want to go too fast where you can feel that you're having to put excessive force into the blade, okay? You want that blade to do its job and work, but don't force it, please, because that's when accidents happen. You also don't want to go too slow. If you start seeing smoke or you start seeing burn marks on your wood, you're going a little bit too slow, so keep that in mind. A helper should never pull stock through the saw. You must push the material all the way through. So you can have a helper. I do recommend having a helper over here that's going to help you hold the board to the fence. So this helper should also be looking at the fence line, making sure that your board is tight against it. There's no gaps. Just really important that the helper does not help pull the board through, okay? What you want to do is the person who's actually cutting their pieces need to help push with their push stick the whole way through the blade, okay, or through the cut. The helper, if they start getting in the habit of pulling that wood, that's how accidents happen. If you start pulling it, that blade will, or that board will lift up and sometimes will pull you back into the blade, which causes an accident or cutting your finger. So please, please, please always push your wood the whole way through. Do not place hands directly in front or over the blade. Always try to work around the blade. I don't want you getting anywhere close to that thing, okay? The saw must be completely stopped before removing any waste material. So anytime that you are going to have a little piece in here, which you will have smaller pieces if you're only cutting a little piece off, make sure the blade is stopped. I'm going to go over how to turn the machine on and turn it off. You need to make sure you turn it off and then wait for the blade to stop before you grab that piece. Never try to cut stock freehand or the material will be thrown from your hands or the saw. We went over it a little bit. It always has to be against a rip fence or the miter gauge, depending on what processes you're going to do. It is easier to use a compound sliding miter saw for cross-cutting operations instead of this miter gauge. Please use a miter saw if you can fit it on there. The only time you're going to be doing the cross-cutting on here is if you have multiple pieces that you need to cut at the same length, or if you have a wider board than 12 inches, you're going to have to do it on here, okay? Because that miter saw will only go up to 12 inches. Be alert at all times, especially when making repetitive cuts. Even if you've made a cut on here or have had woods 1, 2, and then even have taken the second class or advanced woods again, you still need to be cautious when using this machine. If you have any special setup, have me approve that special setup, okay? That's pretty much the test question. So you'll be going and taking that test here very shortly. Please remember that. Now, alright guys, I want to go over how you set up this machine before you use it, as far as turning it on, adjusting your blade and whatnot. Okay, so right here you have your control panel, you have your power switch, and you have the on-off stop paddle here. Okay, the way you're going to turn this machine on, you have to flick this switch up. You'll see it flashing a red dot with a green light. Please make sure that you just be aware that you cannot turn this machine on while this is flashing red. You have to wait for a solid green. What that's doing is it's sending electrical current through the blade, making sure there's nothing touching it, and it's set properly. Once that's a green light, this paddle, you pull it out to turn it on. When you are done, you're going to push the paddle in, you're going to let that blade come to a complete stop, and then you can turn it off. Okay, so this is the off switch. This is kind of your your other secondary power, but make sure that this is off before you go anywhere close to that blade. Okay, so we'll flip that down, you'll see that the light turns off. Okay, this handle here raises and lowers your blade. There is a set screw just like the planer here that will lock it, and if you counterclockwise this, it will lower it. If you go clockwise, it will raise the blade. So remember, that blade has to be set right at the gully above your piece, right in line with it, or an 1/8 inch on the test. You'll set that, you'll lock it in place, so that's good. You'll flip your gully down. You'll have your fence set to where you need to go, and you're ready to go. Okay, so now that's the power on, that's how you adjust that. There is a handle over here on the left side that looks just like the other one that we just went over for your blade height. What this one does is it angles your blade here. So if you have to do any 45 cuts or anything, this is the handle you have to adjust this for. Okay, we're usually going to be using it as a 90 degree, so it's set right where you need to be. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention about the table saw is the main purpose for this is to get your width of the board. Okay. You bring a board up here and you need, your plans call for 4 inches in width, and the width of the board that you need, you're going to set that to 4 inches and you're going to set that there. It's always for the width. Okay. Make sure that you are tight against the fence. If not, it will not come out to what you need. Real quick, you will see on the fence there is 2 sight glasses here with lines on it for measurements. If this fence is on the right side of the blade, which it should be all the time unless you're left-handed or you want to cut on this side, I've never seen students do that. I'd rather you be on the right side. You're always going to look at the right eyeglass if this fence is on that right side. If it's on the left side, you'll look at this left glass. There is a little small roller sheet or piece here that you will align that red line to. But let's say we wanted to cut it, 4 inches. I'm going to set this red line right on the 4-inch line mark, and I'm going to lock this fence in place by pushing it down. Now this fence can't go anywhere. That's whenever you will go ahead and set up your board nice and tight to the fence, keeping your board flat against the tabletop, tight against the fence, and also if you're under 8 inches, you're going to use your push stick and push the whole way through. Okay? You guys are going to be taking the test on this, and then you are going to be actually using it before you actually are able to go free and use these machines. Another thing I want to go over is this blade brake system. Okay, this is your blade brake. It's sitting down into down in the table that you can't see. This is your blade here. Okay, this technically is not touching, obviously, whenever this blade is brand new and the saw is working fine, and this is very close to touching the blade. Electric current can skip from this little aluminum piece onto the blade as it's spinning, and it's always trying to sense conductivity. So if your finger touches it, it senses that, it shoots this aluminum piece out, which then stops the blade and it drops this into the table. Okay, like I said earlier in the video, please go into YouTube and check out that video. I might even show it to you before I let you go in here and use it. Okay, this is called a saw stop. It will save your finger. Please remember, you are not going to test this out, because if you do and I find out that you were doing it on purpose, you will be on the hook for the 160, 180, I forget how much it totally is, but to pay for that, and you will also be kicked out of the class. Make sure that you are not going to test that technology out. This is only for in case your finger touches the blade, to save your finger. Okay, that's pretty much the table saw. If you have any questions, please ask me, but that is how you're going to do it.